They look like war machines from an alternate history. Engines of steel and smoke, too big to be real, too beautiful to be practical. They roar, they burn, they fill the screen and then explode in a blaze of pixeled chaos. But these aren't relics from a forgotten war. They are boss fights. 1996, the year when Metal Slug Super Vehicle hits the arcades for the first time. Between the over-the-top characters and the gorgeous hand-drawn backdrops, this side-scrolling shooter already had plenty of charm. But nothing could prepare players for the absurdity that awaited at the end of every stage. Because the bosses of Metal Slug are not just tough opponents, they are colossal machines, over-engineered to the point of madness. Tanks that carry tanks, ships with treads, robots so oversized they can barely stand. Absurd, ridiculous, and completely fascinating. And that absurdity isn't random. It comes from a retrofuturistic aesthetic, a blend of the impossible and the fascinating we call Dieselpunk. But what exactly makes it distinctive? The term itself was coined in 2001 by game designer Louis Pollack, but the world it describes is much older. Picture the timeline of the quote-unquote punk subcultures. If steampunk is brass pipes and hissing valves, and cyberpunk is neon lights and digital decay, then dieselpunk is the smell of oil, the smoke of factories, and the grind of steely gears and cogs. It lives in the decades between the two world wars, a time when technology leapt forward at the cost of human lives, a time when propaganda posters filled the streets, zeppelins filled the skies, and tanks filled the horizon. Its machines are heavy, riveted and loud, engines exposed, gears oversized. Everything looks as if it was built to last forever, yet doomed to collapse under the weight of endless war. And the color palette, greys, blacks, olive drab, punctuated by the red of insignias and the orange of fire. And its themes echo the age it borrows from: perpetual conflict, totalitarian power, survival in a world locked in stalemate. When we look at Metal Slug, it's easy to see how much of this imagery found its way into the series. The design of its super vehicles and weapons, the portrayal of armies and military regimes, they all draw heavily from the visual and ideological identity of an over-militarized Cold War period. At the center of it all is the Peregrine Falcon Squad: Marco Rossi, Tarma Rowing, Eri Kasamoto, and Fio Germi. They aren't just fighting a single enemy, but a revolving cast of regimes, rebel armies, alien invaders, and mutated creatures. Each mission throws them into a new theater of war: ruined cities, desert fortresses, jungles crawling with bioexperiments, or coastlines bristling with war machines. Every setting pushes the same dieselpunk vocabulary of steel, smoke, and spectacle, and each stage builds to the same kind of climax: a towering boss, the ultimate expression of Metal Slug's dieselpunk imagination. The following, divided into 3 categories, is a selection of bosses that, in my view, best capture both the visual identity and the over-the-top, diesel-fueled chaos of Metal Slug, taking into account only the original arcade releases, from 1 to 5. And we begin on solid ground, the Terrestrial War Machines, rolling steel that showcases Metal Slug's world of war. Even though technically a plane, in Metal Slug it becomes something else entirely. The T-770 Tetsuyuki crash lands on the fictional Villeneuve mountain system and is repurposed as a makeshift headquarters for the rebel army. Here, the aesthetic of diesel-fueled machinery collides with Ruinlust, a relic of the skies, stranded where it doesn't belong. Wooden platforms and improvised ladders cling to its broken fuselage, steel and glass mixing with scaffolding until the whole wreck feels alive, like a parasitic machine resting on top of a waterfall. And this isn't a late game twist. This is the very first boss fight of the very first game. No wonder it became iconic. And if Tetsuyuki show us ruins repurposed into war, the Iron Nokana is the opposite. War machinery stitched together into something new. The Iron Okana multi-role combat vehicle, still from the original Metal Slug, is loosely based on the German SD-KFZ-263 reconnaissance vehicle from 1939, but heavily exaggerated. Rocket launchers mounted on a turret, a platform large enough to carry an entire tank on its tail, and beneath it all, a glass sphere armed with a cannon reminiscent of the bolt turrets slung under American bombers. It's a collage of interwar machinery fused into a single war machine. Sharp edges, oversized weapons, absurd proportions. A perfect case study of how Metal Slug takes real history and twists it into something fantastical yet strangely believable. But Metal Slug doesn't stop at imitation. Sometimes it invents contraptions that never could have existed, like the Dragon Nozuke. Not a static turret, not a simple carriage, but a vehicle with adjustable height, moving independently on top of and alongside the train. This design allowed the boss, the stage and the player to shift at different speeds, turning what could have been a flat encounter into something dynamic and unpredictable. And what about the look? A hulking turret strapped to a four-legged moving platform. So absurd it circles back to genius. Because in Metal Slug, over-engineering isn't a bug, it's the entire point. And if Dragon Nozuke is absurd in concept, Jupiter King takes absurdity and turns it into sheer spectacle. And there it is, the obligatory giant robot, the Jupiter King from Metal Slug 3. If Dieselpunk loves firepower over practicality, this is the ultimate proof. Its tracks could never support the absurd bulk above them. Its head is bigger than its rocket pod. Its left arm alone would throw off any semblance of balance. It shouldn't work, but that's exactly why it does. The Jupiter King is Dieselpunk at its most exaggerated. A design so impractical, so overstuffed with weapons, that it becomes unforgettable. Now, for every tank crawling across the battlefield, there's a shadow above it. Massive rotors and roaring engines. The aerial giants. Smaller than many of the bosses that would follow, the prototype heavy bomber Airbuster Rebirths stand out for both its design and the stage it inhabits. Its retrofuturistic frame seems inspired by the flying boats of the early 20th century, a clear mark of Dieselpunk DNA. But what really elevates the fight is the setting. An endless industrial complex built over a coal mine, vast enough to contain a train and a full-size aircraft flying inside it. Once again, Metal Slug leans into over-engineering, but here it's the relationship between the machine and its backdrop that really steals the spotlight. And it's here, in this very fight, that we first meet Donald Morton, the main antagonist, whose design borrows heavily from some of the questionable leaders of the 20th century, tying Metal Slug even tighter to its Dieselpunk roots. And if Airbuster Rebirths hinted at excess, the VTOL bomber KZ-2 makes excess its entire identity. The design of the KZ-2 leans towards the modern side, echoing Cold War heavy aircrafts like the B-52 Stratofortress or the C-5 Galaxy. But in true Metal Slug fashion, the references are twisted and inflated until the whole thing becomes absurd. Its silhouette alone dominates 2/3 of the entire screen. 4 massive rotor engines, a bizarre double-wing design, an oversized hull so vast it can deploy tanks, drop waves of infantry, and still look like it has room for more. Everything about it is exaggerated, over-engineered, impractical, and these are the common themes that will keep showing up throughout the series, because in Metal Slug even a supposed support vehicle can show up as a flying fortress, raining chaos from above. And from here, the scale only grows, because if the KZ-2 swallowed most of the screen, the shooting ray is so massive it can't even fit inside it. The F502 shooting ray is the definition of an aerial giant. We never see it in full, only when it passes in the background, moving between stages do we get a glimpse of its true size. Its design echoes the experimental Horten HO-229 jet bomber, but inflated to the level of a Dieselpunk Wunderwaffe, a wonder weapon that could only exist in this exaggerated alternate history. Armed to the teeth with machine guns, large cannons, and a massive cargo hold to stockpile aerial mines and smaller aircrafts. And if that weren't enough, it even turns its own backburners into a weapon. The result is one of the most imposing encounters in the series. The outline of its massive frame, the roar of its engines, the storm of firepower, everything here channels the Dieselpunk ideal of firepower over practicality. But the war machine doesn't just rule the skies, it also crawls across coastlines and rises from beneath the waves. Welcome to the Naval Behemoths. And if there is one boss that could stand as the poster child of Metal Slug's Dieselpunk aesthetic, it's the Big She. The amphibious vehicle of destruction Big She is part battleship, part landcrawler. Its sheer presence recalls the fearsome aura of the Japanese battleship Yamato, but here transformed into something even more outrageous. An imposing keel stamped with the Rebel Army insignia that houses a gigantic energy cannon. The command bridge towers upon the structure with an enormous radar antenna and signal lights, the oversized exhaust pipes and a number of anti-aircraft guns bristling from its hull. And then, the detail that makes it iconic. Enormous trucks bolted to the bottom of the ship, dragging this steel fortress across solid ground. It shouldn't work, and yet it does. The tension between the impossible and the strangely believable is what makes Big She stand out from the crowd. It captures the spirit of Metal Slug in its purest form, absurd engines of war filling the screen with firepower and spectacle. And from an amphibious vehicle to a proper naval one, the Covert Operations Submarine HOSMI peculiar design is a contamination of Dieselpunk with sci-fi elements. This piece of technology is, lore-wise, one of the first examples of the alliance between the Rebel Army and the Martians. And the shape of the vessel mirrors this. Less sharp corners and rigid armor, more curves and flowing lines, as if a sea monster had been turned into steel. Even its weapons break away from the norm. No cannons, no machine guns, but bolts of energy and crackling electric beams. What grounds it back into Dieselpunk is the setting. The fight unfolds inside a massive sewer tunnel, with the submarine emerging from the murky waters below. The design may be otherworldly, but it's the stage that makes the whole encounter absurd. An alien-looking sub lurking in a filthy human underworld. And on top of that, the fight twists the gameplay itself. For once, the player is firing downwards, adding complexity and variety to the chaos on screen. And the cross-contamination of species happens once again, but this time in the most grotesque way possible. An impossibly complex machine mounted on a living creature. The huge hermit began as a simple crab, mutated to enormous size by radiation. Captured by the Rebel Army, it was given a hollowed-out Denturion tank as its new shell. From it emerged two massive naval cannons, spitting fireballs while the creature itself lunges with claws the size of the player. And when damaged enough, the tank reveals an oversized third cannon bursting out of its hatches, firing colossal shells that fill the screen. The weapon is so absurdly out of scale that the artist added a crane and dangling wires to support it. A hilarious touch that pretends to make sense of the nonsense, and in doing so makes it even more memorable. It's pure Dieselpunk logic, excess firepower, over-engineered machinery, and the uncanny union of steel and flesh. The huge hermit is a nightmarish hybrid, part tank, part kaiju, and part fever dream of what war could look like if it never stopped escalating. Metal Slug bosses were never meant to be realistic machines of war. They were meant to be spectacles, absurd constructions that push the logic of Dieselpunk to its breaking point. And that's why they still resonate, because behind every tank on treads, every ship on rails, every robot too big to stand, there's a reminder of what makes this series unforgettable, its ability to turn the impossible into something you can fight, defeat, and remember forever. In the end, Metal Slug's bosses are more than just obstacles, they are monuments to excess, icons of absurd design. Dieselpunk wonders that roar, explode, and live on in our memory long after the credits roll.